On my wedding day, my husband's ex-girlfriend appeared, weeping and shouting, "Stop this wedding. I'm pregnant and have a baby by my husband." I was in shock. I turned to my mother-in-law, telling her that Lisa was lying, but she also shouted at me, "You don't have the manners to talk to your mother-in-law." Suddenly, my angry husband came towards me, grabbed the wedding cake knife, and slashed through my wedding dress. Everyone was shocked, but I decided on revenge. Nobody knew what was going to happen in the next few hours. My name is Sarah, and I never imagined my wedding day would be a turning point in my life, one that would lead me down a path I could never have anticipated. As I stood at the altar, dressed in a stunning white gown that flowed gracefully around me, I felt like a queen ready to begin my reign. The grand venue in San Francisco sparkled with lights and flowers, filled with laughter and well wishes from family and friends. At that moment, everything seemed perfect. Ethan, my husband-to-be, stood beside me, looking dashing in his tailored suit. His smile was warm, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive. We had been together for nearly 3 years, and our love had blossomed into what I believed was a fairy tale romance. I envisioned a future filled with joy and adventure. My best friend, Jessica, stood by my side as my maid of honor, her eyes shining with happiness for me. She had always been my rock, and I couldn't wait to start this new chapter in my life. The ceremony began, and as the officiant spoke, my heart swelled with emotion. I could hardly contain my excitement as we exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other forever. Just as I was about to say, "I do," the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. In walked Lisa, Ethan's ex-girlfriend, pale and tear-streaked. She looked disheveled and frantic. The laughter and chatter died down, replaced by a wave of gasps from the crowd. My heart sank as I realized the chaos she was about to unleash. "Ethan," she shouted, her voice shaking. "I'm pregnant with your child." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through the room. Gasps and whispers erupted, echoing off the elegant walls. I felt as if the ground had opened beneath me. My perfect day crumbled in an instant, replaced by confusion and betrayal. Ethan's face turned pale, his eyes wide with shock. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, and my heart raced as I tried to process what was happening. This was not how my wedding day was supposed to unfold. I looked at Jessica, who was as stunned as I was, her mouth agape. Then, before I could gather my thoughts, Mrs. Benson, Ethan's mother, pushed her way through the crowd. She had always favored Lisa, her voice sharp and filled with disdain. "Sarah, how dare you disrespect me on this day?" she shouted, her eyes narrowed. "You think you can just take my son from me?" I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Mrs. Benson, you must have misunderstood. I have nothing but respect for you," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I tried to remain composed, but her words cut deep, and I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, judging and whispering. "Respect," she scoffed, taking a step closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you deserve to be here, don't you? You're nothing but a gold digger trying to trap him." Before I could respond, I noticed Ethan's expression shift from shock to anger. He seemed caught in a whirlwind of emotion, torn between the woman he loved and the mother who had always been a controlling force in his life. As I stood there, trying to make sense of the chaos, I could feel the tension in the air thickening, suffocating me. In a sudden fit of rage, Ethan grabbed the wedding cake knife from the table. The blade glinted ominously under the lights. "Enough!" he yelled, his voice breaking. Then, without warning, he slashed through my veil with the knife, cutting it cleanly in half. The action sent gasps rippling through the crowd, and I stood frozen in shock, the remnants of my wedding veil cascading to the floor like fallen petals. The room fell silent, the shock of his violent outburst hanging heavy in the air. My heart raced as the reality of what had just happened settled in. I felt exposed, stripped of the dreams I had clung to just moments ago. I turned to Ethan, searching for any sign of the man I had fallen in love with. But instead, I saw a stranger consumed by rage and conflict. "I can't believe you did that," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and disbelief. The tears threatened to spill over, but I fought to hold them back. The guests stared, their expressions a mix of sympathy and shock, but no one moved to help. I felt utterly alone. Ethan seemed to realize what he had done. "Sarah, I didn't mean," he began, but I cut him off, feeling a surge of strength wash over me.
"No, Ethan.
"You've shown me who you really are today," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "This is not the man I thought I was marrying." In that moment, I knew that everything had changed. My wedding day, which should have been filled with love and joy, had transformed into a nightmare. The fairy tale I had envisioned shattered into a million pieces, and I stood amidst the remnants, grappling with the reality that the man I thought I knew was capable of such cruelty. As I looked around the room, I saw Jessica's worried face, and I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. My life, once filled with dreams and aspirations, now felt uncertain and dark. I needed to regain control, to reclaim my voice and my power. With a heavy heart and a mind swirling with thoughts, I turned away from Ethan and the crowd. I took a deep breath and walked out of the venue, my mind racing with the events that had just unfolded. I felt a mixture of pain, betrayal, and determination. I refused to let this moment define me. I would rise above this. As I stepped outside into the cool San Francisco air, I knew I had a long road ahead. But one thing was clear: I would fight for my future, no matter how difficult the path may be. I was determined to uncover the truth and seek the justice I deserved. My journey was just beginning. The moments after I left the venue felt like a blur. The crisp San Francisco air filled my lungs, but it did little to clear the fog of shock and disbelief clouding my mind. I couldn't believe the chaos that had just unfolded. My wedding day, the day I had dreamed about for so long, had turned into a horror show, and I felt utterly lost. I drove home in silence, the weight of my emotions pressing down on me. How had Ethan changed so quickly from the man I loved into someone capable of such violence? I replayed the events of the day in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Lisa's shocking announcement, Mrs. Benson's harsh words, and Ethan's violent outburst haunted me. Once home, I collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. My phone buzzed with notifications, but I ignored them. I knew they were probably messages of concern from friends and family, but I didn't have the strength to talk to anyone. Jessica eventually arrived, her worried expression reflecting my own inner turmoil. "Sarah, are you okay?" she asked gently, sitting down beside me. Her presence was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this nightmare. I took a deep breath, feeling the tears begin to well in my eyes. "I don't know, Jess. I don't know what to think. Everything was perfect, and then it all fell apart," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "I'm so sorry this happened," Jessica said, reaching for my hand. "You deserve so much better than this." "I thought Ethan was different," I confessed, my voice breaking. "I thought he loved me. How could he let his mother manipulate him like that? And to lash out like that, it's terrifying." Jessica nodded, her expression serious. "You need to talk to someone about this, Sarah. This isn't just about the wedding. It's about your safety and happiness." She was right. I couldn't keep dismissing what had happened. I needed to confront the situation head-on, not only for my sake, but for my future. I thought about how Ethan had changed so rapidly and how his mother had always seemed to have a hand in his decisions. It was time to dig deeper. The following day, I decided to reach out to Mr. Hall, a private investigator I had heard about through a colleague. I needed someone to help me uncover the truth about Ethan and Mrs. Benson. I wanted to know if this behavior was a pattern, and if there was more at stake than just a disastrous wedding day. When I called Mr. Hall, his voice was calm and professional. "I can help you, Sarah." "What specifically do you need assistance with?" he asked. "I need evidence," I replied, my resolve strengthening. "I suspect there's more going on with Ethan and his mother. I want to know if they've been involved in any wrongdoing, financial or otherwise." "Understood. I'll start by conducting surveillance and looking into their financial records," he said. "You'll have the information you need." After our conversation, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was taking control of my life again. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me. I was still grappling with the emotional aftermath of the wedding, and the thought of what I might uncover made my stomach churn. During this time, Jessica remained by my side, encouraging me to document every interaction I had with Ethan and Mrs. Benson. "You need to protect yourself, Sarah. Keep a record of everything," she advised. With her support, I began to record our conversations discreetly, capturing the subtle manipulations and hurtful comments that had become so common in our interactions. I documented Ethan's anger when I questioned him about the wedding day and how he would often dismiss my feelings as if they were unimportant. "Why can't you just let it go, Sarah?" he would say, frustration lacing his tone. "It's over." "You're overreacting." "No, I'm not," I'd respond, my heart pounding. "You can't just ignore what happened. I need you to understand how I feel." But each time, Ethan's defenses would go up, and I would feel the distance between us growing. It was as if the man I had loved had disappeared, replaced by someone who didn't care about my pain. Meanwhile, Mr. Hall began to gather evidence. He uncovered troubling financial dealings involving Ethan's company, revealing that Mrs. Benson had been managing the finances behind the scenes. The more I learned, the more alarming the picture became. It seemed that their manipulation extended far beyond our relationship. One evening, as Jessica and I reviewed the information we had collected, she looked at me with concern. "Sarah, this is serious. You're not just dealing with emotional abuse. It looks like there's something illegal going on here." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "Mrs. Benson has been funneling money from Ethan's company into her personal accounts. There are transactions here that don't add up," she said, pointing to a spreadsheet on her laptop. My mind reeled. I realized I was not only fighting for my own well-being, but also uncovering a web of deceit that could affect many others. This was no longer just about me. It was about standing up against the wrongs done by the people I had trusted most. As I processed this information, I felt a surge of determination. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I was ready to fight for justice, to reclaim my life and expose the truth. My journey was just beginning, and I wouldn't back down. With every passing day, I found myself more resolute in my quest for justice. I knew I had to confront the truth about Ethan and Mrs. Benson, not just for myself, but for anyone else who might fall victim to their manipulation. The evidence I had gathered was disturbing, and I needed to expose it. As I sat with Jessica one evening, poring over the documents Mr. Hall had provided, I realized I had to take action. "I can't just sit back and let them continue this way," I said, determination surging through me. "I need to organize an event, something that will bring attention to what they're doing." Jessica raised her eyebrows. "You mean like a press conference?" "Not exactly," I replied, shaking my head. "More like a gathering. I'll invite family, friends, and even some media contacts. I want everyone to know the truth about Ethan and his mother. They can't hide behind their lies anymore." "That's a bold move," Jessica said, a mixture of concern and admiration in her eyes. "But are you sure you're ready for this? They won't take kindly to being exposed." "I know," I replied, my heart racing. "But I've already lost so much. I refuse to let them win. This is about taking back control of my life." We began planning the event meticulously. I reached out to trusted friends and family members to explain my situation, inviting them to join me in exposing the truth. I also contacted a few local journalists who had covered similar stories, hoping they would lend their support. With every email sent and every call made, I felt a sense of empowerment grow within me. The day of the event arrived, and the venue was set up beautifully. I had chosen a community hall, a place where the atmosphere felt inviting yet serious. As guests began to trickle in, my nerves started to fray. What if they didn't believe me? What if Ethan and Mrs. Benson turned the tables and painted me as the villain? Jessica, sensing my anxiety, squeezed my hand as we stood at the front of the room. "You've got this, Sarah. Just remember why you're doing this. You're standing up for yourself, and that's powerful." As the last of the guests settled in, I took a deep breath and stepped to the podium. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. I've gathered you here today to share my story, a story of betrayal, manipulation, and a fight for justice. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, some supportive, others uncertain. I spotted a few familiar faces, friends who had been with me through thick and thin, their expressions filled with encouragement. I took another deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment press upon me. I'm here to expose the truth about Ethan and Mrs. Benson, I continued. For too long, they have operated under a facade of respectability, but behind that facade lies a web of deceit. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. With that, I played recordings of conversations where Ethan had belittled me and where Mrs. Benson had manipulated both of us. Gasps filled the room as the truth unfolded. I then shared the financial documents Mr. Hall had uncovered, revealing the embezzlement and fraud that had been taking place. The reactions were immediate. Whispers erupted in the crowd, and I could see disbelief on some faces while others were nodding in understanding. I had done it. I was finally shedding light on the darkness that had surrounded me for too long. Just then, I caught sight of Ethan and Mrs. Benson standing at the back of the room, their faces pale and contorted with anger. I could feel their eyes boring into me, but I refused to look away. I had faced my fears, and I was ready to expose them fully. This is my story, I declared, my voice firm. I refuse to be a victim any longer. I will fight for my truth, and I will seek justice for the wrongs done to me. As the room buzzed with disbelief and questions, I felt a rush of empowerment. I was no longer the woman who had been hurt and manipulated. I was reclaiming my voice and standing tall against the shadows of betrayal. The battle was far from over, but today marked the beginning of my journey toward justice. The days following the event were a whirlwind of emotions. After exposing the truth about Ethan and Mrs. Benson, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The media picked up the story, and suddenly, my personal life was on display for everyone to see. It was daunting, but I knew I had made the right decision. I had finally taken a stand, and there was no turning back. As the court date approached, I felt a sense of determination growing within me. I had gathered enough evidence to support my claims, thanks to Mr. Hall's diligent work and the support of my friends and family. Jessica was by my side every step of the way, encouraging me as I prepared to face Ethan and Mrs. Benson in court. On the morning of the trial, I wore a simple yet elegant outfit, a stark contrast to my wedding dress from just weeks ago. I wanted to convey strength and resilience, not the vulnerability I felt inside. As I entered the courthouse, my heart raced. The imposing building felt cold and intimidating, but I knew this was where I needed to be. As I sat in the courtroom, I could see Ethan and his mother across the room. Their expressions were a mix of anger and disdain, but I held my head high, refusing to let their glares intimidate me. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. My lawyer stood beside me, ready to present our case. Your Honor, my lawyer began, his voice steady and confident. We are here today to present the case against Ethan and Mrs. Benson. This is not just about a divorce. It's about years of emotional and financial abuse that Sarah has endured. I felt a surge of pride as my lawyer laid out the evidence. He detailed the recordings of Ethan's verbal abuse, the financial documents that revealed Mrs. Benson's embezzlement, and the testimony of friends who had witnessed the manipulation and control they exerted over me. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of the toxic environment I had lived in for so long. Ethan's lawyer tried to downplay the evidence, claiming that it was merely a misunderstanding. Sarah is exaggerating, he said, attempting to redirect the narrative. But I refused to be silenced. I felt my heart pound as I took a deep breath, preparing to speak. Your Honor, I am not exaggerating, I said, my voice firm and steady. I've lived through this abuse, and I want to make sure that no one else has to experience it. I deserve justice, and so do all the other victims out there who may not have the strength to fight back. The courtroom fell silent as my words echoed through the room. I could see the judge's expression change, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. As the trial progressed, it became evident that Ethan and Mrs. Benson's facade was crumbling. Witnesses came forward, corroborating my claims and shedding light on their manipulative behaviors. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and I could feel a sense of victory swelling inside me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge announced her decision. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, I grant the divorce and order legal action against both Ethan and Mrs. Benson for their abusive and criminal behavior. A wave of relief washed over me. I had fought for my truth, and I had won. I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't thought was possible just weeks ago. The burden I had carried for so long began to lift, and I realized that I was free. In the weeks that followed, I moved to a peaceful home on the outskirts of Seattle. It was a fresh start, far from the chaos and pain of my past. I took time to reflect on my journey, feeling a deep sense of peace and strength. I had survived the betrayal, faced my fears, and reclaimed my voice. As I sat on my new porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, I smiled to myself. This was my life now, a life filled with hope, healing, and the promise of new beginnings. I had emerged stronger than ever, ready to shape my future, one filled with possibilities and free from the shadows of my past. My story was no longer one of victimhood, but one of resilience and empowerment. I was finally living for myself,